All right. So thank you so much for joining us, Kyle. Could you please tell us a bit about yourself and the line of work that you're in and how you're helping repair shops?
Yeah, I'm Kyle Wiens, and I started iFixit, the free repair manual. Our goal is to teach everybody to fix all of their things. We want to systematically make sure that the internet has knowledge on how to repair all products. Started out with Apple products, like many in the repair industry, but we are systematically expanding to everything. And by everything, I really do mean everything. We have repair manuals for skateboards. We got repair guides for GoPro cameras, Kindles, iPhones. The goal is to be a systematic open resource for people at all skill levels to learn how to fix their things.
Well, that's actually pretty important because the repair of personal products and personal items is very important. And you don't find a lot of guides online to be able to do that. They're fringe topics where you sort of like go into and look into, but I don't think anything as conclusive as iFixit has come before it. And it's really great that, you started from one aspect. Now you're expanding to all sorts of things like skateboards and home appliances and everything else that comes in.
Yeah, we've got the largest library of schematics for power tools on the internet now. We're continuing to expand in all kinds of categories. I think fundamentally, the knowledge of how to repair our things should be available to everybody everywhere in the world. I think the knowledge of how to fix your things is a fundamental right that we've got. And unfortunately, historically, manufacturers, well, over the long run, manufacturers used to do this, but over the last 20 years, we've seen them sort of back off and stop. And so if manufacturers aren't going to provide the service information, it's incumbent on the community, the internet community, to fill that gap.
All right. So I believe that's sort of intention that you had. That's the idea with which iFixit was born. So could you please talk a bit more about the sort of motivation you had when building iFixit from the ground up and the sort of personal journey that came along with it?
In the early days, I was a student. I was studying at a university locally here in town, and I had worked my entire high school career. I worked at a Apple authorized repair shop, whether I was tearing down boxes or sometimes I was fixing machines that let me do the easy repairs. And when I had bought a iBook G3 with the money that I made. I'm dating myself a little bit, but I bought this iBook with the money that I made, making minimum wage, right? So it was something like a year's worth of earnings part time to buy this computer. And I dropped it off of my bed onto the power plug. This was before MagSafe, and the power plug was wiggling a little bit. And it would charge sometimes if I held it. And I could tell it was just a broken solder trace on the power plug. So I said, well, I'll take it apart and I'll just solder that plug back together. Well, it turns out those computers are not trivial to disassemble. And I think we find this most fixers, the first time that you take apart anything is the hardest. After you've done it before, it becomes radically easier. So I was struggling my way through trying to open this thing. And then I decided to take a harder look online, like a service manual for this has to be available. I knew what Apple service manuals look like. And I could not find it. And I Googled and I Googled, I couldn't find it. So it's like, okay, I'll just stumble my way through this. And I bumbled my way through the rest of the repair and I got the computer working. But at the end of it, it was like, wow, this was dramatically harder than it needed to be. And so I did a little bit more research. I was like, why isn't the service manual available online? And I learned that everyone that had posted a service manual had gotten a nasty legal letter from Apple saying, this is a copyright violation, take it down. And they complied. And so there was just this gap in knowledge on the internet. And that was strange to me. I'm so digital native. I assume that like if knowledge exists, it's on the internet. And to find this thing that was not present on the internet was really, really frustrating. So we said, well, I know how to fix it now. So I took the computer apart. We took pictures. We posted the service manual online. And those got very popular. And when I realized that we had sort of filled this missing niche, this missing piece of knowledge in the world. And so we just kept doing it. We've been publishing service manuals ever since and filling the gap that the manufacturers have left.
All right. So it's basically about your own personal experience with the thing where you dropped your Apple computer and opening it up and fixing it was a really tough time. And you mentioned that Apple has had a history of anyone who posted their service manual online to be able to send a cease and desist and get it taken down. It's been a very long time, and those practices with Apple sort of seem to have carried into the present as well. What sort of leg did they have to stand on to be able to do that? And what's the sort of like counter argument to that?
Well, if you've ever seen a YouTube video taken offline due to a DMCA claim, you know the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Companies can just send letters, they can get information removed, whether they have the right or not. They'll claim these are our copyright, we made them, and so most internet, hosting providers will generally remove the information. I don't think that they have a legal leg to stand on. I think that the copyright, if any, on these manuals is very, very thin. But that's been the state of things, and so our approach has been, well, if we're how do we change the balance of power and move control back into the power of consumers, back into the power of the free market, and away from these large manufacturers.
Right.
And there's a number of tactics that we've tried to work on that, but fundamentally, just access to knowledge should not stand in the way of your ability to fix your things.
So the reason that Apple would want that sort of knowledge to be kept to themselves is because they're in fear that it will be used against them. Their copyrights are being violated. Their intellectual property is being squandered and spread around, which basically breeds competitiveness and a lot of other nasty things which they will claim in court. But in fact, if it were just for based on knowledge, which let's say like a normal instruction manual or a textbook, then that sort of like counters their argument. But they always try to bring it to the fact that this is a major security issue. This is a major violation of our rights and our security, and we try to protect our customers with this. So, what do you have to say to sort of that kind of approach?
That like repairing things to undermine the security of these devices.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we hear all kinds of arguments. I mean, when this feels like a little bit of a foolish argument to me. If the device is secure, then it's secure. Fixing it shouldn't make it less secure. And I mean, you think about the world of automotive repair. You can take your car down to a local shop and have them replace the mufflers or the tires. Does that undermine the security of the vehicle? You can swap in a new stereo, right? And that's going to hook in and tie it to the CAN bus of the car. The network on the car needs to be secure no matter what. So what we've found is that overwhelmingly, like these repairs are already happening in many cases, right? And the tooling to be able to do this kind of repair is also broadly available. So when Apple says it's a security risk if people have access to, say, the Horizon machine that they use to repair phones, it's like, well, you gave that tool to someone making $15 an hour at an Apple store with a month of training, right? Like what kind of like extreme security vetting did you give that guy? And can you really demonstrably prove that your experts are so much better? Best Buy has authorized technicians across the United States, and they've been caught stealing photos off of people's phones. Samsung's internal refurbishment team in Texas turned out that they were using hundreds of undocumented immigrants to do these repairs for Samsung. So that argument kind of falls flat to me. It's really just about control. They want to control the process.
And that's actually really harmful to the industry as a whole, because while they say that they're breeding innovation, but with that control, they're also limiting competitorship. They're stopping people from entering that space and dissuading them.
Yeah, they want to control the marketplace. This is not a news story, what the cell phone manufacturers are doing. We see this in every industry. This is a story as old as time, that manufacturers start creating a product, that product becomes successful, then people start fixing the product in the marketplace, that becomes a real substantial market, then the manufacturer says, oh, maybe we should compete with them. We've seen this in the automotive space. Cameras are a great example. Nikon and Canon, like this, were selling cameras, and the independent repair shops popped up. And then Canon and Nikon said, you know what, like we want to bring that service revenue in-house. So they stopped about 6 years ago, they stopped selling parts to independent repair shops. And overnight, thousands of camera shops across the country went out of business. And so you will see, and the reason that they said it's to improve quality, really it was to monopolize service and bring that revenue internally. But it's self-sabotaging. When Nikon and Canon did that, what people started doing was they just stopped fixing their cameras. They stopped buying these fancy cameras that couldn't get fixed, and they switched to just using their phones. And so it was a self-defeating tactic. But I have seen this in industry after industry where manufacturers, given the opportunity to monopolize service, do. Because if you think about it, in your local market, running a repair shop, if you could, wave a magic wand and put the competition out of business, would you do that? Absolutely, anybody would. It's easier to not have competition, but it turns out the competition is actually better for the ecosystem. It's better for everyone, including the manufacturer, over the long term.
Of course, if there's no competition, then you get to rest on your laurels, and you get to dictate the market as it is. And sometimes those practices might be counter to what the consumers want, and to counter to their rights, which is exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is fundamentally an ownership issue. Do we really own the things that we have, or are we just renting them? Are we sharecroppers? Uh, and I would like to believe that we have sort of agency and control over the things in our lives. But yeah, increasingly that's not true. If you're a repair shop and you want control over your own destiny, and then Apple comes along with an independent repair provider program offer and says, hey, we'll help you out. We'll give you access to our fancy tool. You just have to sign over all your customer data for 7 years. That doesn't feel very good.
Absolutely, I can understand that. And we've seen that, in the digital age, a lot of this sort of stuff is happening, especially, a lot in terms of software. Because back in the day, you could buy a piece of software and that, you'd be legally owning it. But right now, we have your Netflixes, we have your Spotify's, we have all sorts of services that, where you pay a monthly subscription, but you don't really own anything. It's, it's being gate kept behind a paywall. And once you stop giving money, it's all gone. You don't get to have ownership and don't get to have access of it, even though you've been paying a significant amount for the creation, which would normally, you would be able to own it.
Right. Yeah. Do we own a copy of Photoshop anymore, or are we just renting it?
Absolutely.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating. I would like to pay you once. And this is the case across the board. Like, who is Apple to say you can't swap the battery in your phone without getting a warning? Like, their opportunity to make money on that product stopped when they sold it to you. They had the choice, right? They didn't have to sell me the phone, but they sold me the phone. I paid them for it. It's mine now. You don't get to say what I do with it. If I want to throw it into a well, I can do that. If I want to paint it green, I can do that. If I want to swap the battery, I can do that.
Absolutely. And that does factor into a lot of the sort of rights that people have in the United States and the world over, because that's how the free market is dictated.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and this is a global thing, right? This isn't just the United States. It's not just Europe. This definitely is a challenge that we see around the world.
And even though it's a challenge around the world right now, the United States is facing quite a major part of it. And the answer to that has been the right to repair movement, which you've been an integral part of. So can we talk a bit more about that? How it was that you got started with the right to repair movement, and can you tell us a bit about it in general?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I saw needed to happen. It was clear that the free market was not going to work on its own, that independent repair needed protection. I did a lot of research on legal frameworks around the world and realized that there just wasn't protection in the electronics industry the way that there historically has been for other industries. And so I started talking with a lot of friends, a lot of experts, a lot of legal experts, a lot of business experts, people running different trade associations, and we decided that we needed to set up a coalition to start systematically tackling these issues. So the first major thing that we did was set up a trade association. Said it would be helpful if the industry had a trade association. So we started repair.org, the Repair Association, and that's representing small shops around the world. And then we started chipping away at the problem. So the model that we looked at when we said, well, how can we create a protective framework for local repair? We looked at the automotive world, where competition really is quite successful in the automotive sector. If you are a local mechanic, you have access to information from Ford or GM or Hyundai or Renault, right? You can get access to the service manuals. You can get access to the schematics. That's something that is not it's not available to folks in other industries. It's just like, well, why is it different for cars? And the reason is that a lot of countries around the world have passed legislation protecting car mechanics, making sure that they have access. So these are the original right to repair laws, were the right to repair your vehicle. And there have been a number of those laws. Massachusetts has passed right to repair laws as recently as 2012, and actually as recently as this fall, they just updated it. So you take a step back and you say, well, why does the car industry have these laws and the tractor industry or the cell phone industry or the camera industry doesn't have those? And the answer is that the car mechanics all belong to a trade association who has lobbied to protect them. And there's no single repair shop that ever could be able to afford to hire lobbyists in Washington, D.C. to pass laws to protect them, right? And if you go back in time, it turns out that the television repair folks who were in the 70s and 80s, that was the big electronics repair industry in the world, they never started a trade association. And then in the 90s, it was the PC repair shops and the camera repair shops. They never started an association. And so then when Canon and Nikon decided to cut off access to service parts, the repair shops had no one to turn to. They didn't have any allies that they had built. And I remember when they did that at CES, that the following January, there was one camera shop showed up at CES, and he's protesting. He's saying, Nikon and Canon are killing camera repair. And he was the only guy. He was the last voice. And he was only there once. And then the whole industry just withered and died. So it was looking at history, looking at these lessons and saying, oh, this is what we have seen. What can we do going forward to make sure that doesn't happen to the cell phone repair industry, that this time won't be like the past times, or we've seen these generations, an industry pops up, lasts for 10 or 20 years, and then it disappears and it sort of evaporates into the wind. And so that was the motivation to start repair.org, and then to start thinking about what would a regulatory protection framework look like for the industry. And we decided to model our approach on what had worked for the aftermarket associations. And we took the bills that they passed in Massachusetts, we modified them for electronics, and we started introducing them. For the last 5 years, they've been introduced and considered in a number of states across the U.S. This year, there are 27 different states that have introduced a version of right to repair, including California, where I'm at. Now we have to fight the manufacturers, but we're fighting them in a democratic way, right? We get to have a conversation where we have a seat at the table. We're kind of equal players. And so that's been really important to be able to bring the interests of the repair industry to policymakers.
Well, it seems like it's taken quite a while for you to go from an idea to be able to have representation, to be able to unionize, and to the point where you are actually at the table and talking to all these manufacturers and trying to come up with policy. So the sort of journey that happened over there, how did you start building towards it? What were your successes, and what sort of things did you see that you wanted to be able to fix up and work on in the future?
So when we think about legislation, we look at the industry and we say, what do we need to survive? We need a supply chain. We need access to parts. We need tools, and we can whittle our own pencil of screwdrivers if we need to. Like, anyone can figure that out. But when it comes to software tools, maybe there's no way for us to create the software tools. For example, if you're authorized by Samsung, you have access to their super cool, fancy software diagnostic tool. It includes things like checks to make sure you re-waterproof the phone correctly. It would sure be nice if everyone else had access to that software tool. So you got supply chain, you got tools, and then parts, right? And in some cases we have access to parts, in other cases we don't. And by the way, tools would include software tools to like repair locks. So if you had parts that were serialized, tied to the phone, you should be able to pair a new part to that device. So that's the fundamental legislative framework is access to parts, tools, and information. And that's the bill that's been introduced. If you want to get into the weeds, look at the actual text of the legislation that's being proposed, you can go to repair.org and click on the legislation tab, and you can see it's a Word document. It's got the law that's being proposed. And then we go to policymakers and we see if we can get legislation introduced and maybe more importantly passed to protect the industry.
All right. So this sort of law that you have, the guidelines that you have that you want to be able to bring into law, is it unified in all 50 states, or is it there, like you mentioned, there are variations? What sort of variations are there? Let's say from the sort of bill that's being proposed in California, as opposed to the one that's being proposed in New York.
Yeah, great question. Every state does it a little bit differently. And by the way, you can think of, we call them the United States. we're almost like different countries in many respects. There are laws that are the case in California that aren't the case in Oregon. The way that we have approached customizing the legislation has been to pick off different industries. So, for example, Nebraska is working on the right to repair bill. It only covers farm equipment. It doesn't cover smartphones, electronics. We would like it if it includes smartphones, but the farmers are the ones who are really pushing things in Nebraska. And so maybe they'll pass right to repair for tractors first, and then we'll get it passed for smartphones later. Other places like Massachusetts and New York are full bore, they're right to repair everything. They include tractors, they include smartphones, they include pretty much anything that has electronics in it. In other places like California, we are seeing introduction of medical focused right to repair bills. So hospitals are starting to get on board, because if you think about who is the independent repairer in the medical space, it's a hospital. Hospitals have biomedical repair technicians that work for them. And it turns out that the ventilator manufacturers have been locking hospitals out the same way Apple's been locking people out of fixing electronics. So that's really been the difference from state to state is they're kind of focused on different pieces of the problem. Of course, we in the sort of like cell phone repair shop world care most about Apple and Samsung, but there's a lot of other bad actors out there.
All right, that's understandable. And I feel like even with these other states, like you mentioned, Nebraska and all, if legislation does get passed over there, but say for like tractors or medical equipment, that's marginal gains, because at least you've got the foot in the door. And, it leads to better things. It leads to things with regards to cell phones and with regards to other sort of electronic equipment and what have you.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thought process is let's start, maybe we can start small and then we can build on our successes. We need to get some legislation passed. This, by the way, this is how most political movements start, right? You ask for everything that you need, you get a little bit of it, and then that starts to build momentum, and then you continue on from there.
Right, absolutely. It's a constant process. At least, you need to be able to start working on the problem, and then you see how you can refine it, because you'll have quantifiable data on how well you've been able to resolve this, and what more can you do to be able to fix it, and how big of a pool you're working with. Does this expand into other areas? Do other aspects need to be catered towards it, et cetera, et cetera?
Absolutely. And but I should mention, this is not just the United States thing. We have a Right to Repair Coalition that's making good progress in Australia. They just introduced updated automotive right to repair rules. Canada was debating right to repair on the floor of Parliament last week. In Europe, we've seen broad consensus that we need right to repair. And France has started rolling out a repair score, a repairability index, next to the price of a product. There's a score from 1 to 10, kind of like the iFixit repairability score, where you have an idea of whether a phone is going to be easier or harder to fix. And that scoring system is actually really great. It includes things like access to information, access to parts, to repair shops and the public. So that's really neat to see a holistic index like that.
Well, that's actually really good, because like you mentioned, iFixit has that sort of repairability index on its website and on a lot of its schematics. So you already have a framework that's been set up by, let's say, iFixit or someone else. All these countries need to do is to be able to adopt it and work with these companies, work with these good actors, and to be able to expand them, bring them into legislation, create a sort of system by which they operate.
Yeah, I mean, this is not something that's going to happen without the support of local shops. Political move, like a politician in New York doesn't want to hear from me. They want to hear from folks who are in their district, from business people. And I think it is actually kind of you don't realize as a business person how much of an impact that you can have. That right, the businesses in the politician's district really are their lifeblood. It's these are the people who are voting for them, and people who are creating jobs right here at home. That's important. And if you the politicians will listen to you. You might not believe it. I think we as an industry tend to be a little bit pessimistic about this. Like, nobody cares about us. I had to lift myself up by my bootstraps. I've done everything myself. I never had any help from politicians. So why would they listen to me? Well, they will. Absolutely, they will. Invite them to your shop and show them what you do.
Right, absolutely, because the politicians, they work on they work for the most part on what their constituents would like. And since as a business owner, you've risen to a position where your say matters, and the sort of impact that you have on the society that's around you, your constituency, it matters. So naturally, your politician who once probably would not cater to you now would want to be interested in what you have to say because you're a market leader. You're a person who's creating that sort of opportunity.
Right. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Now, with the conversation that we've been having, initially before we went into this, I thought I had the idea that right to repair was mostly to do with like a lot to do with electronics because that's mostly where the voices were being heard with regards to cell phones, with regards to electronics, etc. But right to repair itself encompasses not just electronics but all sorts of things like general repairs, automotive repairs, and all these other these niches where repairs happen and where repairs are necessary. So it's not just one small aspect of it, it's in the grand scheme of things. So I feel that, that's sort of a misconception that a lot of people have with the right to repair, just as I did. What sort of other misconceptions do you feel that people have when you talk about them about right to repair?
Well, one thing that we've heard is, well, this wouldn't solve the problem because the manufacturers will continue to, they'll continue to like pair parts to a device. So maybe then you couldn't use aftermarket parts. And that's that the goal with right to repair is to close those loopholes, right? To make sure that that's not possible. And so we have, very smart, very clever lawyers who are trying to think 3 steps ahead of the manufacturers and make sure that that we address any of those concerns up front. Every year that we introduce legislation, the legislation changes a little bit based on what the manufacturers are doing. And we'll definitely, if we can get kind of a common floor of regulation, and then we can build on it, we can ratchet it up. And if the manufacturers, get more restrictive in some places, we'll be able to change it. Another thing that we've heard, you have lots of arguments against right to repair. Those arguments were made against the automotive right to repair laws in Massachusetts. The manufacturers said, well, if you pass right to repair, people will be hacking cars like crazy, or it will undermine the safety of vehicles, or it will undermine the brand value of manufacturers. And we're sitting here close to a decade after Massachusetts passed that law, and none of those things have come to pass. So it turns out, I like to say right to repair is something that all humans are in favor of. You talk to any normal person on the street, and they're going to be a fan. We have to overcome objections from people who are paid to believe otherwise by the manufacturers. But in general, like this is a common sense issue globally on all sides of the political spectrum.
Well, I can completely understand that because as a personal anecdote, back when I was a kid, I used to have a PlayStation 2, which once, over the course of a period of time, collected a lot of dust inside. And to be able to open it up was a real challenge with having, sort of like no knowledge about it. It was a real workaround. And, I know that there are a lot of people who do that as a hobby and as their profession. They just open up and tinker around with things. It's how they sort of like work with it. Some people can't afford to have that fancy new gadget, which is why they want to be able to work with what they have right now. But it needs repairs, it needs fixing, it needs maintenance. And the fact that they don't have access to those tools, to those schematics, and in some cases, it's illegal for them to be able to operate on their own property, that is a major hindrance. So it's necessary for these sort of things to be in place. That's why it's not just in the US, like you mentioned, it's all over the world. Because me in Pakistan being able to do that sort of thing, it was difficult. But if I had the sort of empowerment in terms of schematics and in terms of being able to like have guides for it, being able to have tools for it, that would have made my job a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I think impacts all of us, and we're I'm highly motivated to do what I can to make sure that this thriving culture of repair continues. I fear that we're in the introduction of software and therefore copyright and intellectual property into all the products that we have really has the potential to stifle an industry and to stifle circular economy, which is this idea that we can be more resource efficient, take advantage of the products we've already got.
No, obviously, I mean, I do have knowledge about the sort of copyright laws that go around. And while it is necessary in some areas, some places it just stifles creativity, stifles innovation, stifles the competitiveness and the rights of the people to be able to exercise. It's difficult. It's absolutely difficult to be able to work in that sort of environment. And major props to you and everyone else that's working towards this. Like you mentioned, that you are motivated to be able to work on the right to repair issue and to be able to raise it, talk about it, get it moving forward. In the repair community at large, what else is being done and who else is doing it in terms of like influencers, repair technicians, business owners, and regular people? What are they doing and what can they do to be able to spread the message?
Yeah, well, the first thing to do is get involved. Join repair.org. Get involved in the broader community. No repair shop is an island. We're all in this together. And I know that it can feel like the shops in your area are competition, but that's fine. Talk with shops outside of your area. You get involved in the broader discussion. Just and you can almost think about it like insurance. Like you have insurance for your building in case you get broken into or you have a fire. The same thing can be said for protecting your business over the next handful of years. So investing in joining a trade association is important. And then the follow-up to that is to build relationships with your local politicians. It can be really good marketing anyway to join your chamber of commerce or start going to some of the local political meetups, because you meet like the kind of people who are involved in politics or other business leaders who are all breaking things, and they're all older and they have no idea how to fix their technology. So it's just good business. It's good sound marketing to get engaged with the broader community. And then you have those friendships, and then you can, if you meet your assembly member, your local senator, you can, mention, hey, this is an issue that impacts us. I can't tell you how many of we're talking about 27 states that have introduced right to repair bills. Well, most of those are driven by local repair shops. There's one repair shop in Washington that, his congressman actually came into a shop to get his phone fixed. And then he told him about the broader problems. He says, wow, this is a really important issue. I'm going to chase this down. And he introduced a bill in Washington. And he actually, the shop had been complaining about some of the glued in batteries on some of these devices. And so the Washington bill actually went so far as banning glued in batteries, which it turns out you can do. So I would encourage you maybe think a little bit like Gandhi, where he would say, be the change that you want to see in the world. We can spend a lot of time in this industry complaining. What if instead we started to kind of visualize what a stable, sustainable, long-term industry looks like?
That's great. That's actually pretty good. And it's really nice to be able to hear that there's this sort of stuff that's happening right now. On top of that, I would like to add that there's an active component of it where you go ahead and you talk to your assemblyman, you talk to your congressman you talk to your representative about what's going on, the sort of problems that you're facing, and why this needs to be talked about at large. That's a very active form of being able to do that. And along with that, to complement it, we also probably, it would help if we have some sort of passive way to be able to spread that information where, we have content up online, whether it's YouTube, your websites, your blogs, news articles, or anywhere else, so that when they go out and they start trying to do research for this sort of stuff, they have knowledge, they have information that not just them, but other people obviously can come across, and to be able to learn. Those sort of experiences, those sort of viewpoints are very necessary because they stay evergreen, and they are there for people to look out for. In an active conversation, it's in the moment. But when you have that sort of stuff, it's there and it gets spread around, and it helps out quite a lot. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, we need to be raising the knowledge quotient in the industry. We need resources to look at. So that's why on iFixit we try to have a steady stream of new information coming out for people, whether it's a teardown of the latest gizmo or information on what's happening with right to repair. There's a big Federal Trade Commission report now. We had 15,000 people sign a petition last week that we delivered to the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. So, staying in the loop, I would say subscribe to RSS feeds on iFixit and repair.org. You can, there's lots of ways to get engaged. Follow folks on Twitter, because there's a lot happening. You'd be surprised at how much momentum we have right now.
Right, with that petition that you mentioned right now, is this the one that Louis Rossmann is spearheading?
Louis Rossmann helped out. I set up the petition, but Louis Rossmann was definitely involved and sent many thousands of people to help sign it, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we were able to deliver it to the Federal Trade Commission last week.
Right. So I believe that Louis Rossmann also has a sort of campaign going on. I'm not sure if it's on GoFundMe or something. Could you tell us a bit about that if you have any knowledge about it?
Yeah. Louis is fundraising on GoFundMe, which is great. I mean, across the board, like we need more funding to fight for the repair world. So historically, that's why we set up repair.org as a association. So you pay, $50 a year to be a member or whatever. That money goes directly into the same kind of thing that Lewis is talking about, where we have manufacturers will come into a state and they'll hire the most expensive lobbyist there is to represent their interests. So we have to have some money on our side to be able to counter that. The most recent Massachusetts right to repair bill, it cost $20 million in advertising to get that bill over the finish line. It was very expensive.
Oh, I can understand.
So when you're up against some of the most profitable companies in the history of the world, having a little bit of funding on our side helps a lot. And so Lewis's fundraising, Repair.org is fundraising. This is all really important.
And I believe, not just being able to fundraise, spreading the word organically is also very important because you have your influencers like Linus from Linus Tech Tips in Canada. He's been doing a great job. He recently put out a video explaining about right to repair, and I believe that that's a pretty good thing. A lot more influencers should be talking about this within the industry, whether they're with cell phone or computers or all sorts of sort of repairs. Talking about this sort of stuff with their audience and educating them on it is very important as well, so that they become aware and then they can sort of help and pitch in as well.
Right. Yeah. Linus' video is fantastic. I think he did a really wonderful job of explaining it, maybe better than I can. He's a wonderful communicator. And I would say this is another area where you can have an influence is ask all of your influencers, anybody that you follow, ask them to weigh in on right to repair publicly if we can get this to be, more of a groundswell. So we need all hands on deck. We're up against, Apple and other companies are spending so much money to stop this. The only way that we can overcome them is with, a united, concerted, very loud voice.
Absolutely. It's, all through the power of everyone that we can achieve this. And it's not just going to cut it if just the big wigs are talking. It's the average person. Like you mentioned that, it's the constituents in every area in the United States and throughout the entire world in general. Those sort of people need to be able to speak up and need to be able to talk about it, that this is their right. This is a thing that they need, and it needs to be considered by politicians. So once we do have that sort of action going on, what sort of plans or milestones does the right to repair movement have in the future that it wishes to achieve?
Well, our goal is to equalize access to information. So I would say, you think about the things that the authorized or branded repair shops have that everyone else doesn't, whether that's access to software, access to special tooling, supply chain information. We want to equalize that access. And we want to make sure that the industry is protected so that, a software update doesn't, invalidate our ability to do our work. Like you shouldn't be able to have a software update and then everyone has swapped out screens. All of a sudden those phones stop working. We've seen this play out before, right? We've all lived through Error 53. We don't want it to happen again.
That's true.
So this is, but fortunately, like we were able to get Apple to roll back Error 53 relatively quickly because we were united and we had a strong voice and we were able to point out the problem. So I think it's about how can we create a sustainable long-term repair industry.
But having that sort of event is very rare because that was basically a global thing. It was a global catastrophe, on that big of a scale, which is why Apple had to backpedal on its sort of workings to be able to cater to their wider audience. It didn't want to show that it was a bit, too anti-consumerism, but that's basically what it was. So even though those sort of things are very few and far between, what sort of instances do you feel would help your cause in being able to identify that, all right, this is where right to repair is necessary. This is why we need it.
Well, anytime you have a major issue, you have a major problem, I think we can raise that to the forefront. We've talked a lot about the problem with AirPods. AirPods aren't really fixable. We're not generally swapping batteries on those. There are some very clever people who figured out some strategies, but it's a very challenging repair. So push back on designs like that. And that's where the French repair labeling comes in. Europe is talking about repair labeling, where we can push back on designs. iFixit has been doing repairability scorecards for over a decade now, and that kind of thing is really helpful.
Right. iFixit has done a great job with that, by the way. And, I'd love to have people, see it as well. So could you tell us a bit more about where people can find it and find you personally?
Yeah, so go to iFixit.com, and then if you want to learn more, go to Right to Repair. You can browse our teardowns and the repairability scores that we give them. If you see something that's missing from iFixit, you can add it. You can translate. Like iFixit is a community effort. It's something that is done, by all of us. iFixit is not me. I'm not on the ivory tower saying this is the only way to do the repair. We've gotten some criticism from folks saying, well, that's a consumer repair that you showed for that particular process. Pros do it differently. Well, start a pro guide then. They can live next to each other. You can have the do it yourself process, and you can have the professional process. I don't know how to fix everything. You probably don't know how to fix everything, but all of us together can combine our knowledge and create something greater than any of us individually.
That's very interesting. And yeah, I believe that, since we're talking about right to repair, we do need to be able to show that, this is something that we support. And the fact that iFixit has that sort of platform where it's a consolidated effort by everyone to come up with guides for things and come up with pro repair, strategies. That's important. That's a good thing. That plays into your favor. So it's a great thing that you guys are doing that. What else do you have planned for the future for iFixit?
Well, we're going to continue to expand information that we have into other kinds of products. So we added medical device service manuals last year. We've added power tool schematics. We're continuing to add information. So we want to be responsive to the industry. Of course, we're going to stay at the cutting edge, and we'll be on the iPhone 13. And whatever comes next, we'll be, of course, on that. But we're also just looking across the board and saying, how can we continue to innovate? We kind of think of ourselves as the operating system for the repair world. We want to provide all of the kind of knowledge and resources that people need, and so we'll continue with that.
Absolutely, we're happy to have you be there as the operating system of the repair world. So, Kyle, tell us a bit about yourself. As in, like, where can people find you and reach out to you?
I'm on Twitter the most, so I'm at K Wiens, KWIENS on Twitter, or follow iFixit and get engaged. And I would say where I am is I'm on the stakeholder calls with the Repair Association regularly. So if you want to have a conversation with us, join the Repair Association and get engaged, get involved.
All right, that's great. So hopefully, people will be able to reach out to you more and contribute to the cause, and that's going to be great. So, Kyle, thank you so much once again for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I really, really enjoyed being able to talk to you about the right to repair. So, are there any final words that you have for us?
I would just say that this is something that we can do, right, and that we must do. If we want the industry to survive, we're going to have to get this done, and it's absolutely possible. A lot of our allies on this have worked on other political campaigns that have been very successful. Plastic bags. Are a huge source of litter. Well, one of our top campaigners was the person who got plastic bags banned in California. So we've got allies, we've got Consumer Reports, we've got a lot of great folks, we got a lot of great legal thinkers. Really, the thing that we need more of right now is just local shops stepping up and getting involved.
Right. So hopefully, local shops will get that message and they start stepping up and start contributing for the greater cause. And with that, we'll all be able to achieve the right to repair, hopefully in the future. Right.
Very soon. We're going to get this done. Absolutely.
And it's looking great. Thank you once again, Kyle, for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I really had a great time.
Thanks for having me.